So, Francisco, tell me a story.
Ah, I hate that.
Gotcha.
I absolutely
I
hate that.
know.
I hate it. Kids do it to me all the time. And I'm like, what story? Which story do you want me to tell? I hate it. Like,
Again.
oh, I could tell you about this one. I don't know. If they say, can you tell me this one story again? I'm like, sure, fine. Or, go away. But just tell me any story. It's like tell me a joke.
Yeah.
It's just that's not how it's supposed to work, right? As much as I tell stories all the time, I tell too many stories, if anything. But there's something off-putting about
It just makes you just,
tell me a story.
yeah.
Yeah. And also, and this is it, I find this interesting as well. Most people's brains don't have they don't have a folder as such called stories. You might have like
Oh, let me pull up my story notebook.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
like stuff that my kids said, things that happened when I was traveling, right? That's how you think about it. Someone say, "Oh, did you go away this weekend?" Yeah. Anything interesting happening? I was like, "Oh yeah, actually." And then you just tell it. If someone's like, "Have you got any stories about this weekend?" Even me, I have to go. Yeah, hold on. Like, it's just not. The brain has to go around in a weird
Yeah,
path, and it
I
doesn't
feel like
get
that's
it.
some sort of performance anxiety, right? Like, oh my gosh, now I have to be this interesting storyteller suddenly because somebody's asking for it. And that's not how story works, right? You tell a story because it just wants to come out, not because it has to. Which brings me to our point for today. What are stories?
Wow, I don't think there's a perfect definition. You can find different things in dictionaries and things of that nature.
I
I tend
quite
to,
like your definition, actually.
yes,
Yeah.
yes, I like my own opinion too. Uh, my definition is that a story is a real life example that makes a point. And as I say to all my clients and students, if you're talking about entertainment and fiction, a story can be many things, but for our purposes, a story is a real life example that you're using to make a point, something that happened to somebody somewhere, sometime, and you're using that to make a point. And the problem, what a story actually is, and how your brain retrieves a story or saves a story, is one of the big issues most people have with telling stories, is because you don't, we were just talking about folders in the brain. You don't have stories unless you're used to telling stories. If you come to me and say, can you tell me that story about, you shouting at your kid and then, they're her crying. Or if you tell me the story about, I am this angry or whatever, right? Which is the story I tell my keynote. I know exactly which story you're talking about, and I can tell it, right? If you tell me about the story when your kid said this thing, I know what the story is, I can tell it. But usually I just think of things that happened. And that's how most people think of things, is things that happened to you or to someone you know. So when they're trying to think about a story to tell, they go, do I know any stories? Or even worse, do I know any good stories? And your brain just comes up blank. Because it's just not there, right? And that is by far the biggest problem when it comes to telling stories, is that people, one, don't have a particularly good system for keeping track of things that happen to them that could be told as stories. And even if they have written them down somewhere, they don't necessarily know how to make the connection. I was like, okay, I'm looking for a particular story to tell in this keynote. I'm looking for a particular story to tell when I go on a podcast. Lots of things happen to me, but which one should I tell?
Which is the best example
Yeah.
for that.
So even if you understand this, even if you go over the first hurdle, which is a story is a real life thing, it's something that happened to me, and I want to use it to make a point. They don't know how to go from that to, okay, how do I?
To making the point.
Yeah. Okay, I get what a story is, but how do I find it now? Right? Okay, I get what I'm trying to do, but I'm not sure how to find it. And that's when you get things like what a lot of people teach. My version of it is first, last, worst, best, right? When was the first time that this happened to you, right? Just the other day, I had a guy who's a friend, and we worked together in different capacities, and he came to me and said, I'm having trouble with my sort of origin story, because he's always been like a physiotherapist that worked with high-level athletes, and now he's gone into, he studied psychology, right? And he's like, I'm not quite sure how to connect those things. I was like, why did you study psychology? And it's like, well, because I found that with a lot of clients, just the physical stuff wasn't doing it, right? They had mental blocks, and that was getting in the way, either making the problem worse or creating the problem in the first place. And I realized I needed to learn more about that if I was trying to help my clients. And I said, okay, that makes complete sense to me. Did that happen to one particular client, or did it happen to a whole bunch of different clients? And he said, to be fair, it probably happened to a lot of clients. And I said, okay, then you just, do you remember more or less who the first one was when you kind of like, oh, hold on, where the light bulb went off? And it's like, yeah, I think I can remember. So you can tell that one, right? Tell when you were talking to this client and realize this thing. Or if you don't want to tell that one, you can tell the last one. It's like, because this kept happening, right? It happened once, and then it happened again, and then it happened again, and maybe this happened for months or years. What is the one that was the straw that broke the camel's back? Like, which was the one that sent you go, okay, enough, right? If I'm going to do this job well, I need to go and study psychology, right? And that's, either of those could be the story, right? And a lot of people just don't, like, to me, it just sounded, this is the easiest thing ever.
So what's the learning here that people can kind of take and apply to the way that they kind of catalog the events in their life?
So there's two separate things, right? Even without cataloging, if you're going to make a point about something, I'm going to guess that this is something that matters to you, that you thought about for a while. Maybe this is something you work with on a regular basis. So this shouldn't be the hardest thing in the world to find, right? Almost always what you are looking for is either the first time you came across the problem or the last time that you came across the problem. And the first one made you aware of it. The last one moved you to action. And it doesn't need to be it doesn't need to be the problem. It could be the solution. Maybe this is a problem that we all know about, so there's nothing particularly incredible about discovering the problem, but maybe your solution is very unique, right? So then you're going to tell us about the first time you came across that solution. It could be the worst time, right? Maybe this was an extreme of the problem. Maybe this was the best time is because you tried it and the results were so astounding that you decided, okay, I need to share this with the world, right?
Yeah. I love this distinction you're making. Sorry, I'm interrupting you, but I think this is important. The first one made you aware of it, and the last, or maybe the best or the worst, is what moved you to action.
Yeah.
Because that's a cue that I think a lot of people can relate to. What is the first time that I became aware that this was a problem? When did I actually move to action on this problem?
Yeah. Okay. And this is something I have to remind myself to always do when I'm talking to speakers or people who want to give a TED Talk is you don't need to talk about someone's story to find out if they have an idea, right? They might have an idea worth sharing, and you don't necessarily need to know their story to know if the idea is worth sharing. But until they tell you the story, you don't actually know if it tracks, right? If it's like, is this something that happened to them and now they've gone and researched it and learned something about it and now they can share it with the world? Or is this just an idea they had?
So is that credibility building?
Yeah, because sometimes people get the wrong idea, a great idea from an experience that doesn't back it up, right? Because it's influenced by what they thought before, by things they read, things they watched or whatever. And that becomes a problem because you have to tell the story. And then if the story doesn't track, then you have an issue, right? Which is, this is probably a separate podcast on its own. So the very first thing that anyone needs to do if they want to tell a story is to find the story, right? All of the advice in the world about how to tell a story well is absolutely pointless if you don't have a story, if you don't have the right story to share. And this should be obvious if you think about when you share stories in your personal life, right? Something happens and you're just like dying to tell someone about it. And the last thing in your mind is like, what is the structure of the story? It's like you go, no, I was at the post office and this guy walked in and said this really weird thing. And then something happened and something happened, something happened. You just go and tell people, right? It's very easy to do. What is hard to do is try to craft a story out of not having a story to tell, right? So find a story, and sometimes you don't even need to worry about anything else. You just tell it. But that's not always the case. Sometimes you need to do a little bit more work. So the next thing I tend to find that people need to be clear on is, what is the point of my story? Because if you don't know exactly what the point is,
the point.
yeah,
right?
you need to know what the point
part of-
is, right? And the point is almost always something that changed, right? It's you learning something, and or because of that thing, you never did something again, or you always did something different after that thing that happened to you. So how are you or the main character of the story different at the end of it? If there is no change, then there is no story, right? It might be a fun anecdote to share with your friends, but it's probably not something you're going to use for a TED Talk or a keynote. So figure out the point of your story. The point is going to come at the end, obviously. And then your job is to try and start that story as close to the end as possible.
Why is that before you go on?
Because otherwise you're going to start giving endless amounts of context, and it's going to take too long to get where you need to go to. For example, and this is an example that I can't remember her name. I read this on LinkedIn. I'm really, really sorry. But it's a great example. And it's if you're going to tell a story about going out camping and almost being attacked by a bear, you don't start the story 2 weeks before when you're planning the trip with your brother. You start the story when you're in the tent with your brother and you start hearing strange noises. Now, if you need to backtrack a little bit and just give us a little context, you can do that. Right. But ideally, you want to start just before something happens, right? And if you do that, it gets rid of a lot of problems in most stories. Because it's like, where do you start the story? Right? Just that's it. The story is about a bear attacking you or almost attacking you. How close to that can you start? Now, you're not Quentin Tarantino. You don't want to start with like, so I'm running for my life because there's this bear chasing me.
Flashback of a flashback of a flashback.
That just sounds really strange when you tell a story, right? I would just start with, so I'm camping with my brother, right? And we're at this new place that we've never gone before, right? So we're inside the tent, we're just kind of turning out for the night, and we start hearing these really strange noises, right? And that's when I look at him and I say, I told you, this is a bear, and we're now going to die, right? Because 2 weeks before, I had told him that this place was whatever. So I can give a little bit of context there if I have to.
Probably depends on what point you're trying to make.
Sure.
Right? The context you give has to link up to that.
Yes, and that's a perfect connection, because if your story is just a fun, not fun, but like, this crazy thing just happened to us, we almost got killed by a bear, you can just tell about, like, you heard the noise, you opened the tent, you saw the bear, you ran away, how you escaped. And that's it. That's the fun anecdote to share. If your story is about underestimating risks, even though you knew about, like you heard about it and you decide, it's going to be fine, then maybe you or your brother kind of thinking, I think there are bears over there, and you're going, it's fine, we don't need bear sprays or anything like that, then that needs to be in the story, right? You can get many different points out of it, right? But once you know the point, it's like, okay, the point is about me learning not to underestimate risks. So the next thing you need to make sure is in your story is somewhere near the beginning of your story, you need to be a person who underestimates risks, right? So somebody tells you about it, you read, to have that arc, right? So you can, there's not going to be any bears. And then people are going, I'm pretty sure there's going to be a bear in this story. And then the bear shows up or whatever. Yeah. So that's also very basic, right? Find a story, find a moment in time, which is you kind of running away from a bear. Figure out what the point you're going to want to tell. Start as close to the end of that story as possible. Make sure there is some reversion of that point, some opposite of that point near the beginning of the story. And then, as much as it makes sense to do, include dialogue. Right, and it could be you in this case with your brother. It could be you with yourself. Because if you're talking to yourself, oh no, and I'm thinking, I'm definitely dying here. It's a lot more interesting than, and I was definitely thinking that was the day I was going to die. Right, it's just harder to get emotion across. And I think if you've done all those things, the only other thing that some people will still screw up is how they start the story. And the easiest way to start a story is with one of three things: time, place, and or action, right? So you could say, I'm camping with it's 2 weeks ago and I'm camping with my brother, right? So this is all the three things. You could be just, I'm camping with my brother and we hear some strange noises. Like, it doesn't really matter when it happened, probably, right? So you can just ditch that, right? I'm 15 years old and I'm just getting to school for my last day of class of the year, whatever, right? So you can place it that way too. Like, age works if it's far enough, right? If it's like I'm 27, might not do much for anybody, right? But I'm 15 years old, or I'm 10 years old, I'm 7 years old, whatever, tends to work well. So that's it, right? What is the story? I've almost been attacked by a bear. Okay, what is the point you're going to make? I underestimated risks. All right, start at the tent. Make sure that the bit about you underestimating risks are there in the beginning. Give us a time, place, and or action to get it started. Get some dialogue between you and your brother, you and yourself, and you've got yourself a story, which shouldn't take a lot of time to tell, right? You can probably tell that whole story in a couple of minutes, depending on how convoluted your escape from the bear is, right? And that's about it. But the starting point has to be, I almost got killed by a bear when I was out camping with my brother. Okay? If you don't have that, and if you're just trying to tell a story about underestimating risk, it's harder. Because you can go, when was the last time I got myself in trouble? Okay. Did I know about the risks? I kind of did. Right. Is it obvious that I underestimated the risk? Yeah. It's harder to do it that way. You can do it that way, but it's harder. It's easier, I think, to find a story that actually happened, that is interesting on its own, and then thinking, what could the story be about? And it could be about many things. Right?
Yeah. What if someone feels like their life is not that interesting? Like they don't have a lot of adventure stories or exciting things happening to them. Where can they find what the story is?
I'm sure there are people that are immensely boring. I'm sure there are people whose lives are very, very uninteresting. But what people tend to think...
But they're not our audience.
We would hope not. But what most people tend to think is interesting, and what most people tend to think is exciting when it comes to a story, are the uncommon, non-relatable things. The traditional example is climbing Everest or something along those lines, right? Like, it's like big sporting challenges. Those are not super relatable to most people. I never climbed Everest. I never will climb Everest. I don't think there's much you can tell me about the climb itself that I'm going to find super interesting. I would care about your motives. Like, what made you... Are you just trying to impress your dad? Maybe I can relate to that, right? And those the things that people say to each other in relationships, in friendships, in the workplace, like, is there anything weird, thought-provoking, or funny that you or anyone near you has done? Because those are the things we are more interested in, right? A story that sounds real, right? And I was just at work and my boss told me this. Those are the stories you go, oh no, I don't believe he said that. Oh, what a jerk, right? Those are the stories that tend to work better, right? And so I think to most people is there anything that that happened to you, that you said or someone said to you, that you heard, that you read somewhere, that is even a tiny bit out of the ordinary? Right? Like, it's just not something that happens every day. So that would be one port of call. The other one is stuff that annoyed you, right? Like, what made you pissed off in the last week? And sometimes that's it. There's nothing. Being cut off in traffic is not particularly unexpected.
I can feel my Seinfeld coming on.
Yeah. Yes, tricky one these days. Getting worse to relate to Seinfeld these days. But anyway, what has annoyed you, right? People cut you off in traffic, you get really bad service at a restaurant. Those things can make for good stories, especially if the person does something that is like that just seemed particularly rude, right? Like, the waiter came and brought me the food and said, what would you like for a second, for a main course? And I'm like, no, I'm just going to have a starter. And the waiter looked at me and went, like, that happened to me, right? Like, I went to a set course meal and I just asked for the starter and the waiter was like, right? And then I didn't want to drink, and it's like, what would you like to drink? And I was like, no, I'm just water. And he just like refused to look at me for the rest of the meal. He just dropped the stuff on the table and walked away.
I feel your pain.
I mean, like, who has not had a rude waiter in their life recently, right? Have something happen in traffic, have some weird thing at work. Sometimes the mistakes you almost make are really interesting. The weird
The,
things
the
you
ones you
think,
do make.
the mistakes you think about doing are funny. Like there's a
Yeah.
story that I always tell that gets a ton of laughs. It's just like I was leaving the house, my trousers weren't ironed properly, and I decided to iron them while wearing them.
I love
Right?
that one.
Yeah. Like you don't need to do it. You don't even need to do
Yeah.
it. You just need to go. Is it a good idea if I do this thing? And you don't actually
Yeah.
do it because you're not
Yeah.
me, right? But that is still funny, right? Like, you drank too much and you're trying, like, you're completely drunk and you're trying to wonder if it's a good idea to get a bicycle and go home, right? And you're like, I think I'm absolutely okay to drive. And then you just like stumble on your way to the bicycle and people go, yeah, I've been there.
Yes, so what I'm hearing is, and it's something that I kind of love to explore with my clients, is what are the imperfections that, we wouldn't normally put on display, but so long as we can use them to make that point of our story, they can be
Yeah.
useful, they can be interesting, they can tell the world, they can put words to something that everybody has experienced or has thought, but haven't quite dared to put
Yeah.
out there.
Yeah.
And that is super relatable.
Yeah, and even just the mental processes of having common sense, right? You
Exactly.
realize this is a
Yes.
terrible idea. If I do
Yeah.
this, the oven is going to explode, and you don't do it,
Yeah.
right?
Like
So
your shadow side and your super
yes,
ego kind of having
yes,
that internal
and
debate.
and
Yeah.
it can just be like the differences between people, right? So
Hmm.
certain things that to me seem crazy, and you'd be a fool to do it. My wife does them all the time, right? And the opposite is also true. There's stuff that she would never do or think of doing, and I do, and I like, was that not a good thing, right? Like how different people look at different things in life is super relatable, and I'm sure that everybody has that. You just need to think about like, how are you different than your friends or your partner, right? What do they like to do that you hate? What do you like to do that they hate? What's something that seems absolutely sensible to you that other people think is crazy, and other way around? And it's just, every time that makes you wanna say, oh, you wouldn't believe what just happened to me yesterday, right?
Hmm.
All of those, you wouldn't believe what just happened, or I need to tell you what this guy said to me.
So get this, right?
Almost all of those
Yeah.
are amazing
Mhm.
for stories. And yes, it is much easier, like it is for me, I guess, if you have small kids. Small kids are an endless source of inspiration. Just the other day, my 5-year-old was running all the time when we were going somewhere, and I was like, "Oh, you're really into running?" And she's like, "Yes, and it's important because if I run a lot, then I'll be dead for less time." I'm like, "I'll be dead for less time." I was like, "You mean you're gonna live longer?" And she's like, "Yes, that." I was like, "Well, I mean, in the
Love
grand
it.
scheme of things, you will be dead for
Sure.
less time." So she's
Yeah.
not wrong, you know. She's like, "Hey, I just didn't know how to say it." I was like, "It's okay. It's okay. I'll be
Oh,
dead for less
brilliant.
time is good."
Yeah. I'll remember that one. Yeah, to your point, I think from another conversation we had, it's the pebble in the shoe rather than the
Yep.
Mount Everest story,
Yep.
right? That these moments of everyday life that
Yep.
mean something in
Yeah.
the grand scheme of things.
We've talked a little bit about homework for life, which I got from Matthew
Hmm.
Dix, which is just this idea of writing down things that happen to you every day that could become a story. And because I believe that if you were spending all your day with someone the way you are when you travel, for example, you end up sharing a lot of stories, right? You're just there. Did you see that guy? That's a bit weird, right? Oh, what is this guy doing? The airplane doing, right? Like you spend the whole day pointing out things that you're noticing, or things I just remember that time we traveled to wherever, because you have an audience there, right? You're sharing all these things because you have an audience. Whereas, because I guess most of us spend most of our days in front of a computer, sometimes alone by ourselves in a house and not in an office, as it used to be the order for most of the last 100 years. A lot of this stuff happens, and you might even go, "Well, there's no one to tell this to." So unless you're on Twitter or X or whatever, just posting nonstop, all of these snippets of stories just vanish in the ether because you're not telling them to anybody. So that's just that habit of writing things down is very useful, because then when you're like, the waiter was really rude to me, and because of that I never went back to that restaurant again. It's the most basic story about customer services or about treating your clients well. And if you just say that, is not powerful. If you say, we've all been to restaurants that we used to like and we were mistreated by a waiter and we never went back, that doesn't do anything for you. Right? People nod, but it doesn't do anything for you. If you have the specific example with the waiter saying something weird to you, then they go like, oh, I love that story. Right? I still remember what that waiter said to you. Right? And that's the difference of having the story to tell and then just telling it, and maybe you tell it perfectly, maybe you don't. And not having it and trying to how do I do this now? It's just, find the story first. Sometimes that's all you need to do for a telling story. Storytelling 101 is find the story, right? And 102 and 103 and 104 is still find the story. Are you sure you found the story? Make sure you found the story. Once you've done that, the rest can be very useful, but not before.
So what I'm taking from this is moment in time.
Find
That proves a point,
Yep.
right? There has to be a point to it. Start as close to the end as possible.
Yep.
What else?
Have something in the beginning that is kind of the opposite of your point, so shows your character has learned something.
So there's that change. The story has to be a story of change.
Make sure that there is some dialogue, even if it's with yourself, and start the story with time, place, and or action. If you do those things, you are miles ahead of almost anyone telling stories. You'll be telling stories that are 2 or 3 minutes long at the most, and people will know why you're telling them, which is kind of important when you're using this in a professional context.
Fantastic. Thanks, everyone, for being with us for this conversation. If you have stories that you would love to share, we would love to hear them. So drop them either in a comment or send us an email, and see you on the SpeakerPath.